The evening arrived quietly, the kind that slipped in without asking, wrapping the small Vermont house in cool air and soft orange light, and Emma Parker felt it before anything happened, that strange sense that something old was about to return, something she had packed away carefully years ago. She had finished her work early, set her laptop aside, and stood near the kitchen counter with a mug of tea she barely touched, watching leaves fall in slow circles outside the window, thinking about nothing and everything at once, about how life had become steady in a way she once wanted, how marriage to Daniel had given her comfort, routine, and safety, but also how some days felt too quiet, too smooth, like a river that no longer rushed, and she told herself that this was adulthood, that peace was better than passion, that stability was love grown mature. Yet when the doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, it cut through her thoughts like a crack in glass, and her heart jumped for reasons she did not yet understand. Daniel called out from the living room that he would get it, but Emma was already moving, drawn forward by instinct more than choice, and when she opened the door, the world tilted slightly, because standing there, framed by fading daylight, was Michael Hayes, older than she remembered yet instantly familiar, his hair touched with gray at the edges, his smile hesitant but warm, the same smile that once stayed with her long after conversations ended, and for a brief second, time folded in on itself, pulling her back to college halls, late-night talks, shared dreams, moments that never became what they almost were. Michael spoke her name softly, as if afraid it might break, and Emma realized she had stopped breathing, that her hands were cold, that the careful walls she had built around her past had cracked open without warning. Before she could find the right words, Daniel stepped into the doorway, his presence solid and grounding, and when his eyes met Michael's, Emma felt the shift instantly, like the air before a storm, because Daniel's face changed in a way she had never seen before, his relaxed expression tightening, his shoulders drawing back, his voice polite but sharp as he asked who was at the door, and Emma introduced them with a forced calm, explaining that Michael was an old friend from college, emphasizing the word old as if it could keep everything in place. They moved inside, the house suddenly feeling smaller, and as they sat in the living room, Emma noticed details she hadn't before, the way Michael held his cup carefully, the way Daniel sat too straight, the silence between words growing heavier with each passing minute, and Michael spoke quickly, almost nervously, explaining that he was back in town for a short work assignment, that he had remembered Emma lived nearby, that he hoped the visit wasn't an inconvenience, and Emma nodded, smiling, answering when needed, but her attention kept drifting to Daniel, who listened closely, asked measured questions, and smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Emma felt pulled in two directions, her past stirring with memories she hadn't allowed herself to revisit, her present standing beside her, suddenly uncertain, and she realized with a quiet shock that Daniel was not just uncomfortable, he was affected, deeply, personally, as if Michael's presence had touched something fragile inside him. When Michael finally stood to leave, thanking them for their time and offering a polite goodbye, Emma walked him to the door, her words careful, her tone friendly but restrained, and as the door closed behind him, the house fell into a silence thicker than before, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a passing car, and Daniel did not speak right away, did not touch her, did not move, and Emma felt a slow, uneasy understanding settle in her chest that this moment mattered more than she first believed. Later, as evening turned to night and they moved through their routine in clipped motions, Daniel's quiet grew louder than any argument, and when he finally spoke, asking casually why she had never mentioned Michael before, Emma heard the tension beneath the question, the careful way he hid something raw, and she answered honestly but briefly, saying it had been a long time ago, that Michael was part of another life, that it hadn't seemed important. Yet even as she spoke, she wondered if that was fully true, not because Michael still held her heart, but because he had once known it in a way few ever did. That night, lying in bed beside her husband, Emma stared at the ceiling as memories drifted in uninvited, not romantic scenes or regrets, but feelings, youthful hope, unfinished conversations, the weight of choices made and paths not taken, and she realized the knock at the door had not just brought back an old friend, it had exposed something hidden in her marriage, a crack she had never noticed, and as Daniel lay awake beside her, turned slightly away, Emma understood with a quiet ache that whatever came next, nothing would feel quite as simple again. The next few days moved faster than Emma expected, as if the visit had loosened time itself, and the calm rhythm of her life no longer followed familiar steps. Daniel returned to work as usual, polite and responsible, but something had shifted in him, a quiet distance that showed in small ways, like shorter replies, longer pauses, and a habit of checking his phone even when nothing seemed urgent. And Emma noticed everything, because once something breaks the surface, it is impossible to ignore. Michael did not disappear after that first night. Instead, he became a gentle presence around town, not chasing Emma, not crossing lines, but existing close enough to remind her that the past could still walk beside the present. And when she ran into him at a cafe 2 mornings later, the meeting felt both accidental and expected, his smile cautious, his tone respectful as they exchanged small talk about work, weather, and how strange it felt to see familiar streets after so many years. And Emma felt calm with him, not excited, not restless, just understood in a quiet way that surprised her. Later that evening, when Emma mentioned the cafe meeting, Daniel's reaction was immediate, his hand pausing mid-motion as he set down his keys, his eyes lifting too quickly, asking how long they talked, what they discussed, whether it was planned, and Emma answered honestly, feeling confused by the edge in his voice, reminding him it was nothing more than a brief conversation. But Daniel nodded without responding, retreating into silence that followed them through dinner and into the night. Over the next week, these moments repeated, small encounters with Michael that meant little on their own but seemed to add weight to Daniel's thoughts, and Emma sensed his attention sharpening, not on Michael directly, but on her, watching for signs she wasn't even sure existed, and this quiet tension began to change how she moved through her own home, how she chose her words, how she explained ordinary things. And she hated the feeling of needing to justify innocence. One evening, Daniel surprised her by asking about her college years in detail, questions he had never cared to explore before, and as Emma spoke about classes, roommates, ambitions, she felt him listening closely, as if searching for something hidden between her sentences. And when Michael's name came up naturally, Daniel's face tightened, and he asked what Michael had meant to her back then, and Emma paused, realizing that avoiding the truth would only make it heavier, so she said simply that Michael had been important, that they had been close, that life moved in different directions before anything serious happened, and Daniel absorbed this quietly, but the air between them grew heavier, filled with thoughts left unspoken. Days later, Emma noticed Daniel staying later at work, returning home tired and distracted, and when she asked if something was wrong, he brushed it off, saying he was fine, but his tone lacked warmth. And Emma began to feel a slow fear building inside her, not fear of betrayal, but fear of losing connection, of watching the person she loved drift inward without letting her follow. Meanwhile, Michael seemed to sense the growing strain and adjusted his presence, keeping his distance, offering polite nods instead of conversations when they crossed paths, and this restraint made Emma respect him more, even as it stirred a sadness she couldn't fully explain, because it reminded her how carefully adults must walk around feelings, how different everything was from the honesty of youth. The tension reached a quiet peak one Sunday afternoon when Daniel and Emma attended a local community event, and Michael appeared unexpectedly among the crowd, his presence subtle but unmistakable, and Emma saw Daniel notice him instantly, his posture changing, his hand tightening around hers, not in affection but in something closer to fear, and for the first time Emma understood that Daniel wasn't threatened by Michael as a person, but by what he represented, a version of Emma that existed before marriage, before shared routines, before compromises, and that realization hurt more than anger ever could. Later that night, after they returned home, Daniel finally spoke with honesty instead of restraint, telling Emma that seeing Michael made him feel like a stranger in his own marriage, like he had walked into a story that started before him and never fully ended, and Emma listened without interrupting, tears gathering not from guilt but from recognition, because she saw how easy it was to assume love was secure simply because it lasted, forgetting that even strong bonds need reassurance. She told Daniel she loved him, that her life was with him, that the past did not compete with the present, but Daniel confessed that knowing something did not always stop feeling something else, and that fear had a way of growing in silence, and in that moment, Emma realized part 2 of this story was not about an old friend returning, but about a marriage facing a truth it had avoided, that love, when untested, can feel permanent, but when tested by memory, comparison, and insecurity, it must either deepen or slowly unravel. And as they went to bed that night, lying closer than before yet separated by unspoken thoughts, Emma understood that the real conflict was no longer outside their home, but inside it, waiting for a choice neither of them could avoid much longer. The tension that had been quietly building now moved faster, pressing into every corner of Emma and Daniel's life, turning ordinary moments into heavy ones, and Emma felt at the moment she woke each morning, the space between them no longer empty but filled with thoughts neither knew how to release. Daniel became more alert, more watchful, not controlling but deeply aware, as if every small change might confirm a fear he did not want to name, and Emma, sensing this, tried harder to be open, explaining her schedule, mentioning casual encounters before he could ask, hoping clarity would calm him, yet the effort itself made everything feel fragile. Michael, meanwhile, made a clear decision to step back, limiting his presence to brief greetings and distant smiles, and when Emma finally spoke to him alone at the cafe one afternoon, the meeting felt different from before, quieter and more serious. As Michael told her he had noticed the strain his return caused and did not want to be the reason her marriage suffered, his voice calm but sincere, and Emma felt a mix of relief and sadness, not because she wanted more from him, but because she respected the care he showed, the kind of care that asked for nothing. That evening, Daniel came home early, his expression tired but focused, and after dinner he asked Emma to sit with him, no anger in his voice, only honesty, and he told her that seeing Michael had awakened fears he didn't know he carried, fears of not being enough, of being chosen only because time moved forward and not because love stayed strong, and Emma listened closely, realizing how little they had spoken about insecurity during their years together, assuming stability meant safety, and she answered him truthfully, saying that Michael represented a chapter that shaped her but did not define her future, that love for Daniel was not a replacement but a choice she continued to make every day. Daniel admitted that logic had not helped, that emotions rarely followed rules, and that what hurt most was imagining a version of Emma he could never fully know, a younger self filled with dreams and intensity that marriage had softened into routine, and Emma felt tears rise, not from blame but from understanding, because she too sometimes missed parts of herself she barely recognized anymore. Over the following days, they tried to reconnect intentionally, taking walks, sharing meals without phones, revisiting conversations they once enjoyed, but the effort itself felt like proof that something was wrong, and this realization weighed on Emma heavily, because love, she believed, should feel natural, not forced, yet she also knew that growth often comes through discomfort. Michael eventually reached out with a short message, explaining he would be leaving town sooner than planned, that work had shifted, and that he wanted to say goodbye properly, and Emma told Daniel about the message immediately, watching his reaction carefully, and instead of tension, she saw relief mixed with guilt, as Daniel nodded and said he appreciated her honesty, a small step that felt larger than it was. Emma met Michael one last time in the early evening, the cafe quiet, the conversation brief but meaningful, and Michael told her he was glad to see she had built a life filled with care and commitment, that some stories are meant to stay unfinished so others can fully begin, and Emma thanked him for understanding, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't known she needed, and as she walked home alone, she realized the ache in her chest was not loss, but release. That night, Emma and Daniel spoke again, more calmly than before, and Daniel admitted he had been afraid of losing her to something invisible, to memory, to comparison, and Emma told him that love doesn't disappear quietly, that it fades only when neglected, and that facing fear together mattered more than pretending it didn't exist. And as they sat side by side, the distance between them slowly narrowed, not erased, but softened. Emma understood then that part 3 was not about choosing between a past and a present, but about choosing honesty over silence, courage over comfort, and as Daniel reached for her hand, holding it without pressure or fear, she felt something steady return, not the excitement of youth, but the deeper warmth of love tested and still standing, even as both of them knew the final chapter would depend on what they chose to do next. Now that everything hidden had finally been brought into the light, the final shift came quietly, not with drama or raised voices, but with choices made in small, steady moments. And Emma felt it the morning after Michael left town, when the house felt lighter, not because he was gone, but because the tension he unknowingly carried with him had finally lifted, allowing space for something honest to grow. Daniel woke early and made breakfast, an ordinary act that felt meaningful, and as they sat together at the table, there was no rush to fill the silence, no fear hiding behind words, only a calm awareness that something important had passed between them and changed them both. Daniel spoke first, admitting that the past weeks had forced him to look at himself in ways he had avoided, to see how easily confidence can hide fear, how love can feel strong yet still need care, and Emma listened, feeling gratitude rather than relief, because he was no longer protecting his pride at the cost of their connection. She shared her own truth, that seeing Michael again had not made her want another life, but had reminded her that people are shaped by many chapters, and that marriage does not erase the past but asks both partners to accept it without competition. And Daniel nodded, finally understanding that loving someone fully means loving the story that came before as well. Over the next days, they made quiet changes, not grand promises but real ones, choosing to speak sooner instead of letting doubt grow, choosing presence over habit, choosing each other even when it felt uncomfortable. And Emma noticed how Daniel's touch returned naturally, how his laughter came easier, how the weight in his eyes slowly faded. One evening, Daniel handed Emma a folded note, something he had written during a break at work, and inside it simply said that he chose her every day, not because of fear of losing her, but because life with her was still the place he wanted to be. And Emma felt tears rise, not from sadness but from the deep relief of being truly seen. They spent more time together, walking familiar streets, cooking meals slowly, talking about hopes they had postponed, realizing that love does not stay alive by accident, but by attention. And Emma felt herself falling in love again, not with the excitement of beginnings, but with the strength of continuity. Weeks later, Emma received a short message from Michael, wishing her well and thanking her for the kindness of closure, and she showed it to Daniel without hesitation, and he smiled, genuinely this time, because the fear was gone, replaced by trust earned through honesty. And Emma knew then that the story had reached its true end. The return of an old friend had not broken their marriage, had not stolen anything from them, but had exposed the quiet cracks that needed care, and by facing them instead of hiding, Emma and Daniel had chosen growth over comfort, truth over silence, and love over fear. And as they sat together one night, the window open to cool air, the past finally resting where it belonged, Emma understood that what changed everything was not Michael's return, but Daniel's reaction, because it forced them both to see that love is not proven by how little it is challenged, but by how deeply it is protected when it is.